Sriram, Aarthi, thank you so much for taking the time today. I am so grateful for I just don't understand why you guys are spending the time here with me today. You guys have interviewed people like Elon Musk, Mark Zuckerberg. You're signed to WME. The New York Times is covering you. Your production quality is insane. The guest selection is incredible. I am just so grateful for you guys to be here with me today. I'm just like, wow, I feel really honored and humbled. So thank you so much for taking the time.
Well, thank you for having us. And, let me give you, actually a real serious answer to why we're doing this. One of, I think, our life hacks or my life hack is try and find people before they get famous and blow up. And, both of us are huge fans of your podcast. And, we absolutely love all the support. And I know that sooner and not later you're going to have millions of subs, millions of downloads. You're going to be up there, and it'd be hard for us to get booked on your show then. So we got to get in early, right? Like
this
like
is
then,
our way of being like, we knew you when.
Oh yeah, yeah. Like in 2 years from now, you'll be like, yeah, talk to my booking team, and we can slot you in 6 months maybe, and so like I'm just trying to get in early, like, but that's the job of a VC. You got to get in the seed round, right? Like before it becomes hard. So that's the deal, Danny.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, when I I appreciate all the kind words, but when I listen to you guys speak and when I listen to you guys interview people, I'm like, these two people are meant for doing this because you guys have such a clear connection with each other and ability to ask thoughtful questions and also have chemistry with each other in such a remarkable way. When did you guys know you were going to start a podcast?
You should do the story.
I mean, I think it still doesn't feel legit. I think it's just like what we would do at our home in front of the TV or something. We're just goofing off, and it just doesn't feel real. But thanks for saying that. We started about 2 years ago, almost to the day, I think. About 2 years ago, we kind of, thick of the pandemic, we were just sitting at home. We used to host we work in the tech industry. We live in San Francisco, and we used to host a lot of startup founders and people, similar to us at home to do these like dinners and that kind of thing, to just learn, share knowledge, that stuff. And what ended up happening was during the pandemic, we just stopped doing all of those, and that December, we were at home and we were like, wouldn't it be nice if we just did those, but online, like virtually? And we kind of started this show, an audio-only show on Clubhouse. And for the first month or so, it was just, conversations, people who we liked, we would just bring on board, like Mark Andreessen and Steven Sinofsky. And we would do conversations around how to fundraise, how to do performance reviews, how to hire your first exec at your company, like very advice-oriented content for startups. And then I think we started inviting other startup founders we knew to come onto the platform. And then I think Elon Musk showed up on the show and Mark Zuckerberg showed up, and it kind of sort of like just blew up. And so it's very organic. We didn't really plan for it this way. And then we realized, we really wanted to like have a proper studio set up and just invest time and effort into this. So we moved it to YouTube and just scaled the whole production. I mean, if you see the front of it, it kind of looks scary. It's like, it looks very legit. And so, yeah, that's kind of the origins of it.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, like you said, totally accidental. And now, we are in it. We're in the game.
It's funny because I dug up a YC interview you did, Aarthi, and someone asked you, what do you wish someone had told you when you were 15? And your answer was, I wish someone had told me to look at what you spend that time doing for fun, and that might be what you actually might end up working on. And I find it so funny because that is something that you guys are doing to this day right now as well.
Oh man, I actually don't remember saying that, but I'm really glad I said it, because now I once you said it, I was like, yeah, like that sounds right. That
Someone smart must have
that's a
said that.
good advice. Yeah, I sound really smart saying that, but I think it's true. I think for us, we don't spend a ton of time because we both, we do other stuff. We have our own jobs, but for us, this is kind of our passion project where. Part of it, we are outsiders. We came from India. We didn't have a lot coming in. We didn't have any built-in network, none of that. And so like Silicon Valley and the tech ecosystem has given us a lot. And this is kind of our way of paying it forward. And part of it is like we have so much fun doing this. We learn a lot, and it's just great to just be a part of this ecosystem and be a creator. We never thought of ourselves as creators, and so it's just really fun to do that.
Yeah, and I think if it wasn't fun, it's really hard to do this long term. I mean, I think you and I, we're trying to do something very similar, and we talk to a lot of other people, and if I talk to a lot of people who start this and they burn out. There's kind of an interesting statistic. I think like 90% of podcasts don't make it to episode 20. I think
We hit 21.
21 on the YouTube version. We have probably over 100 plus on the Clubhouse and the version from last year. Yeah. And it's true because over the long term, it has to be fun. You have to look forward to it, right? And that's what, if you look at the people who are doing this for many years, the Rogans, the Lex Friedmans, or, on non-internet platforms like Howard Stern or, all the greats like Larry King back in the day, they just enjoyed it. So you have to enjoy it. And so far, it's been fun.
Yeah.
It's funny hearing you describe yourself as an outsider because from my perspective, you guys are talking to the most interesting, the coolest people in the world, and you're getting them on your show. So it seems from my perspective, you're an insider. But it obviously was a transition for you at one point coming from India. So I'm curious if you do feel like an insider, which I would call you an insider today, where I'm at, when did you feel the transition from outsider to insider?
Oh, it's a good question. God, you're good at this, Danny. So by the way, one of the reasons we do the podcast is I think for quite a while, we didn't totally understand why we wanted to do this or what motivates it. I mean, it's fun, interesting, but what really kind of turned on a light switch for us was we would get all these DMs and notes from people, and they would be like, "Oh, I would love to be where you folks are. I would, and especially folks from India, for example, and who are like, hey, how did you get from here to there? And first, to be super honest, we were like, well, we don't really think we have made it. And, but there was something about it which was connecting often to much younger people in their 20s. And so I think one kind of common theme for what we're trying to do is one, kind of document our journey, but also to document a lot of other people who don't often come from backgrounds of wealth or who don't come from central casting, but they've all made it, right? Mm-hmm. Sometimes in technology, sometimes not in technology. And we're like, well, and the idea is that, hey, if they can make it and all they probably had was a laptop or a phone and an internet connection, maybe so can you, and you being the listener or viewer. But it's a great question. So I would say we felt outsiders for most of our careers, right? Like, so we grew up in India, we went to Microsoft and we were up in Microsoft in Seattle. And honestly, we were kind of, these low-level product managers and, technologists. And then when we came from Microsoft to Silicon Valley, at the time, people in Silicon Valley hated people from Microsoft, right? Like it was like, you're this stodgy old enterprise company. We knew nobody here, absolutely nobody. And I think for many years, we were just trying to make our way. We were very lucky. Aarthi went to Y Combinator and started a couple of companies. I was at Facebook. So, we were very lucky. And, I think sometime only maybe the last 3-4 years, where when I started getting more inbounds from people as, I think also we got older, we were like, we might actually, be more on the inside now than on the outside. And I think this show, by the way, is like, we're like, okay, now we are very fortunate to have, people that we work with who trust us, who we know for long periods of time, and who are now built these amazing companies or who have huge audiences. And we're like, okay, let's document that story. But honestly, I don't think, is that a flippening moment? Do you remember? You were like,
where we considered ourselves on the inside?
Yeah, you're like, I'm now in the room where it happens, to misquote Hamilton.
No, I don't feel like anybody truly feels. Maybe somebody like Mark Andreessen, who's like one of the ecosystem creators, probably feels that they're very much on the inside. I feel like for us, there are still like parts where we feel like, oh wow, like we still need to like bridge that gap kind of thing. So I don't think we'll ever feel like 100% there.
Yeah, that's true.
We always, we come from a different country. You can't really change that. And we got into like tech very early, but purely by accident. Like, we weren't one of those folks who were like, knew exactly what we wanted to do, the Stanford, MIT tech ecosystem. Like we didn't have any of that pedigree. So I think we'll always feel a little bit of an outsider. And I think that's actually
That's very good.
healthy.
I think there's maybe some immigrant mentality in there. Oh,
Yeah.
by the way, one thing I found is some of the most successful people in technology and business are never satisfied,
Mhm.
right? Like, they always,
Are you calling us successful without
no, not
saying
us.
so?
No, right? Like, maybe some of the people we aspire to be like, but some of the, I think there is, what is the Andy Grove statement? Only the paranoid survive. I think it was Grove. Like that is so true. I think if you look at the very top of the tech or the business industry, they're always paranoid. They're always worried about the next 21-year-old hacker building something that could uproot them, and they always want more. So that is a common thing.
Yeah.
If you do have that,
I don't know why he said that and went there, but we'll just go
no,
with it.
but if you
Yeah.
do feel the sense of paranoidness, I'm curious if you also feel a level of peace for how far you've come. So like, how do you bridge the gap between like, all right, I want to be better, but also I'm like, I want to appreciate how far I've come. How do you personally both think about that?
I don't know. I think for me, it's like I don't tend to look back. I don't feel like that's useful. I think there's so much to do. I think especially being in the tech industry, the thing that gives me the most energy is I can wake up and there are all kinds of companies being built, lots and lots of founders. And these days now, for the last few months, I've specifically taken this challenge of just like helping founders and helping companies win. And that's been very rewarding. And, it's again, it's my way of giving back where when I built startups, I got a lot of help from people who had no business in helping me. They would just like reach out and just, do stuff. And they would just be like, oh, I'll connect you with this investor. Or are you looking for this person? Maybe I can like come help you. Or, just randomly people just reaching out and no strings attached. And I was not used to that, where it was like, what do you want in return? Like, you're so nice. Um, and now I'm trying to give that back to people. And especially, early stage folks who are either, they don't have somebody to like help brainstorm product strategy or go to market or fundraise with them, like whatever the needs are, I try and help out. But I think the future is what is super exciting for
Yep.
me, where it's there's so much to do, so much to be built, and I think that's what gives me energy.
Yeah. I mean, do you know what a finite versus an infinite game is? Uh, so yeah, I love it. So a finite game, is like, like a sport, wherever, time runs out, you hit a particular score, somebody wins. An infinite game is one that has no stopping condition. Like as the phrase says, you play it forever. And a lot of life is an infinite game. There is no, clock runs out, fourth quarter, and you're done. You just, you get like decades to play this. And I think one very interesting thing about Silicon Valley is it's an infinite game. And it mixes in technology, achievement, social capital, financial capital in really interesting ways. But there is no stopping condition. And Aarti is right. Like, we never look back. We don't really look back or introspect. Maybe we should do more of it. But I think in the earlier parts of our career, right, we were more taking from the game because we were focused on our own careers. Right? We were trying to make it. We were trying to work our way up the corporate ladder and build all these things. And I think at some time over the last few years, and I think it started coming when people would like just hit us up for advice, or you're like, wait, this person was born after the year 2000. Like, what the heck is going on? This is just wrong, right? Like, this is wrong. The year 2000, people being born after the year 2000, like, really messed me up. But I was like, but you're like, okay, well, you are now in a different stage where. Whether you want to call it giving back, whether you want to call it like just getting more folks into technology, right? Like, I don't think our focus is so much more like, oh, we need to just like make it work for ourselves. We've been very lucky. We are in good positions now. Now it's more about, okay, how do we get more people into technology, right? Like, how do we get people who may not, see a direct path, who may be in different parts of the world, how do we get them in there? Or maybe there are founders who are struggling. So it's a very different role, I think, that we are playing now than when we were in early 20s, where we're just trying to break in and, and we were on the other side of those DMs or emails back then. So I think our role has switched a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny because I feel like what you guys highlighted, it's like technology is such a positive sum game. There's so many people who are wanting you to win as well. And I honestly feel the same way about media and podcasting too,
Mhm.
where people just want to help people because they understand that in 5 years or 10 years, that person might be in a different place and that they can help them. And so for you guys, though, you guys got into technology before that was, you understood that likely. So, like, why was the initial attraction to technology so strong for both of you?
Oh wow, you do this one.
I mean, I say this often, and I've told this to Sharon too. If it wasn't for tech, I have no idea what. Like, I would have probably, have to figure out something else. I don't know what that would be, but I think for both of us, we just got into tech. At that time, we thought it was late, but we got into tech pretty early in our lives. We both, I think very similar stories. Our families, like buying a computer was a big deal. And I think we saved up and eventually ended up getting like one like fairly mid-sized, mid-level kind of PC, and started figuring out what it meant to write code. I think for Shriram it was like HTML and building websites. For me, I started getting into basic programming and just starting to get into that. And even through like high school and stuff, we were like, yeah, computers. Like, I don't know what else we would do. Like, I think there was a choice for me to pick like either biology or computer science, and I was like, no, I can't. Like, what would I do there? It just didn't. It seems so obvious to me. And then we ended up studying computer science in college. I have a master's degree in software engineering, similar to Shriram, and graduated from that. And Microsoft kind of, super grateful for the company. They recognized us very early on. So it almost like one thing led to the other, where we started studying computer science, but also started doing our own side projects, where we started just writing code for the fun of it. That's also how, like, Shriram and I meeting was a lot of like just talking about computer science, talking about writing code and that kind of thing. And we met online. And so it's basically given us everything, like just being in this industry. And I don't think we ever saw ourselves as like long-term careers here in
Yeah.
Silicon Valley kind of thing, but we kind of thought eventually we'll end up doing something with computers.
Yeah, it's one of these things like the Steve Jobs quote. It only makes sense when you kind of look back upon it. But one, I was not doing anything else, maybe talking, but that wasn't really an option. One really powerful thing about computers and technology is it's a great leveling field, right? If you have at the time, I had these PC that I begged my dad for a year to go buy. We had dial-up internet connection, which I'm pretty sure most of your viewers don't even know what that means. It was expensive, and your parents would yell at you if you ran up the phone bill, and it was very slow. But that put me on a level playing field with a lot of other people.
Yeah.
I was on almost literally the other side of the world, but that put me on a playing field with a lot of folks. And I think that's still true today. Like anybody who's watching this, right? If you have a laptop or a phone and internet connection, you can probably be in the mix with pretty much anybody else. You can write code, you can create YouTube videos, you can write a tweet, you can post on Instagram, you can create a TikTok, whatever you choose to do, you're pretty much on a level playing field with everybody. And I think that is truly, truly powerful. I think the second part of it, I think you hit on something interesting. It took me a while to realize the pay it forward nature of technology. I'll give you an example. I think when I talk to folks from the entertainment industry, for example, there's a lot of amazing people and a lot of very generous people, but there is a stereotype which is it is zero sum, right? Like, X or Y person gets a role and the other person doesn't, right? And people are often protective. They often play gatekeeper roles. And that's not really true in technology. In technology, you are one good tweet, one DM away from meeting almost anybody famous in the Silicon Valley, right? Or at least at least one good tweet or post away from getting introduction to anybody.
Or even building something on your own.
Yeah, or
right?
building something
Yeah.
on your own. And we had so many, here's a fun story which I don't think we ever sent, but like we had so many people take a bet on us, on help us when they had no reason to. Like, and one good example of this is this was about in 2011, 2012, and Satya Nadella, who's like now obviously runs Microsoft. He was VP of I think Bing or Windows Azure at the time, and and he just took a meeting with us, right? These two random kids, who were thinking of maybe leaving Microsoft, maybe not, and we had dinner with him.
Yeah.
We had dinner with him. He had no idea who we were. We just kind of, I think, sent an email, and and he just had dinner with us, took an evening out of his time, and at the
Just
end of
gave us a career advice for like a couple of hours, and it was crazy. We were like, why? Why is he doing this?
Yeah, and he did two things. One, he was like, he tried to say, hey, we'd love for you folks to stay at Microsoft, but if you're not, right, here are two friends of mine from Silicon Valley that you should go meet. And he knew nothing about our, before, he had never worked with us before at Microsoft, etc. And he introduced a couple of folks, and, and it's funny because 10 years later, I actually, when I caught up with him recently, I was like, hey, do you remember this? And we now think about, okay, who are the 25-year-old, 26-year-old people that we are going out for dinners with when we could be doing other things. So, and I think I've had numerous stories of like people helping us this way with no expectation of getting anything back, and I think that's real magic to what makes technology industry work.
Yeah, I agree.
What was that initial email like? What did you say? How did you approach it? Because a lot of people are in that position right now, and I'm sure it might be hard to remember since it was so long ago, but what would you say if you were in that position today?
To Satya specifically, or just
Yeah.
generally? Okay.
Oh gosh, I'm trying to remember. I think what we had done is we just tried to send him interesting things he may not know, and then we asked for a meeting. Maybe generalize this. I think a lot of people sometimes want to know, how do I send a cold email, or how do I get time with somebody? I get some of this, etc. And what I always tell people is, first of all, like if you're going to write a cold email, you should always should. And one of the best ways to do it is keep it short. Send them something interesting. Make a very clear, specific ask. But a more broader version of this is, the best way is to get somebody information they may not already know. And by the way, you don't have
Add
to
value in some way.
add value in some way, right? Like, for example, right, I will guarantee that if somebody's early in a career, send any CEO or head of product of any company product ideas, right, that will get noticed, that will get forwarded to the entire team, and they may do nothing about it, right? And you send 2 or 3 of those, they will take a meeting with you, right? And they'll be like, we need to meet this person because everyone's starving for talent. And whatever the proxy is, and you could write a tweet, you could send an email. But I think what sometimes I think people do is like, hey, I want to grab a meeting. That's hard, right? Because, people only have like, say, maybe like 5, 6 coffee meetings they can do in a week and they fill up. But the way to stand out is to add value, right? And send ideas, send articles, send something that person may not know. But I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that's right. I think specific examples in the past when we've cold mailed a long time ago were all about, hey, this is why I really like what you're doing. Like, find a connective tissue, or, this is how I can help. Or, these are the things I've learned building something similar to this, or, find a way which is common. Oftentimes, we both get a lot of cold mails, but a lot of it is around like, we saw you on the show, let's meet kind of thing, which is like, we would love to do that, but bandwidth is limited. We have to figure out like what should we do here, and we also have 2 small kids, and so we are trying to like juggle everything. And so for us, the things that really stand out are the ones where it's like, oh, I've done this, I've built this, oh, I want to show you this, I'm trying to fundraise. Like, be specific about the problem that you want to solve or the value that you're trying to offer. And it's okay if you have nothing to offer, but at least like be really specific. I think the worst ones are like, I just want to chat. And we're like, yeah, I would love to too. Like, it's something that we'd love to like figure out, but we just have limited bandwidth in the day.
Yeah. And also I think it's sometimes hard to know who to meet, right? Because like I said, if you just do the math, right? Let's say you do like 7 to 8 what's of these meetings a week, they really add up, and you don't know, how do you prioritize? And I want to quote, like Mark Andreessen loves to quote Steve Martin, and Steve Martin would say, "Be so good that they can't ignore you." And I think that is so true. Like, for example, you and I, we have been DMing for a while, and I've seen your rise, right? I've seen you blow up. I've seen you get all these amazing guests, and, you've been so good that, nobody can ignore you, right?
But I think the general theme is send out cold emails. It's okay if you don't get a response, not to us, but in general. Just, I'm a big fan of cold emails. I'm a big fan of like tweeting, DMing people, telling people that you like something that they built or did or said is always good. Oftentimes, people kind of live in their own world. They have all these perceptions of like, but why didn't they say anything? Why didn't they respond? And like it's literally all in your head. Like, people don't have a lot of bandwidth to think about other people. They're mostly thinking about themselves. And so you just have to like put yourself out there. And the more you get into the habit of putting yourself out there, good things will eventually happen. It'll all just compound and just work itself out.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. And I kind of want to go back to 2003 and earlier before you guys, when you were getting into technology, just because of how cool it is today to be in tech. But back then, I would imagine that it wasn't that quote unquote cool. It
No.
wasn't understood by people. It wasn't something that people gravitated towards. So you mentioned, Arthi, before that you were considering biology or computer science. And I could imagine a lot of parents and friends saying, what do you mean? Be a doctor. That's the surefire
Yes.
path.
Yeah.
Oh, my
So,
parents did that. They were like, I think this was also that fork in the road, the bio computer science thing, happened right before the .com boom and bust, and that was really like the Y2K and all of that. And in India, it was like terrible, right? Like,
wow.
and so by the time we got into having to apply for colleges, computer science was not a thing. It was the thing that people went to when all the other, and it's a very competitive system in India. You have very limited kind of seats in colleges, and so you have to apply, and there's this like long wait list and all of that. And so people applied for computer science when there were no other options. And Sriram and I, we didn't know each other then, but we applied for computer science as the default option. And so people were like, wow, what's wrong
Yeah.
with them? Like, you realize that there is no career prospects, nothing. I remember when I applied for my college seat in the school that I went to, the seniors, like who were 3-4 years ahead of me, they would come in and be like, we are trying to apply for jobs. We are not getting any jobs. That's just the reality of it. But you don't worry, okay? Like, if you want to apply, you should. And it felt very doom and
But
gloom. And our parents were all like, I really hope you know what you're doing here because, like staying at home and not making a living is not an option.
I, that's right. It was not popular. One tiny anecdote. I remember the year we finished our high school and we're trying to get into college. And India, they would have these TV interviews of people who had this top marks, the highest scores, basically. And I had not done as well as him, to put it mildly. And I remember watching him, and he said something like, and this was in 2001, so this was right after Y2K and the dot-com crash, or the peak of the dot-com crash. And he said, I can always learn computers anytime, right? But the industry is not doing well. So I'm going to go do this other thing instead. But I hope he's doing well in his career. But I don't think, oh shit, right? Like, am I like, because the only thing I know to do is computers. And if anybody can do this anytime, am I even doing thing? And I was like, well, too late to change now. Because it was not really what we studied, right? I think a lot of the best technologists we have met, we're all doing this for fun. So we were writing code all night, and kind of picking that in school was kind of was a way to be like, well, we already kind of know it, so we can maybe an easy thing for us because we love it anyway, and hopefully it'll work out. And it did, but trust me, at the time it was.
It was very risky as a
Yeah.
career bet. Now it's not. It's mainstream, but not then, and not where we grew up in. Not that circle.
How did you create the confidence in yourself to chase that when other people were telling you so clearly that it wasn't the right thing to do?
I mean, we didn't. It was just this like I wish it was actually really structured and we didn't think through that much. We were just like, let's roll the dice. Like, this is something that we really want to spend our lives doing.
Yeah.
And I think Sriram has a much better sense of this than I do. I'm always a little bit more anxious and worried about this, like the future stuff. But Sriram's always like, you pick the thing that you really want to invest time in, and trust me, good things will happen. And he'll keep saying that. And I'm like, I don't know where you get this like feeling from. But he like this is something I've learned a lot from him, where he just like takes something, has no kind of future like prospects. Like it's not obvious to me why this would work, but he would be like, it'll work itself out. And he would just like do it. And somehow it just like works itself out. And I don't know if it's confidence, but he just has this like this sense of, oh, things will all be good kind of thing.
I bumble into the right things. Oh, gosh, okay. Lots to unpack there, right? Like lots to unpack there. You're getting like a slight. Oh wow, okay. I don't know. I think I'm a big fan of creating optionality. And for example, right? Like I like meeting interesting people. I might have slid into your DMs at one point in time. Anybody doing interesting. I have no idea what that might mean. Maybe we work together, maybe we don't, but I just like doing it.
And this is from like even over a decade ago. Shriram would be like, I just met this person. I'm like, why? And he'd be like, why not? Like, you just seemed interesting. And he wrote this blog post, and I thought that was really fun. And so I just like pinged him, and we got coffee. And I'm like, and he's like, nothing. You just do that. And he's been doing this like hundreds of times every year, just reaching out to people who are like way more successful, well, very accomplished.
Yeah.
And it really comes from a place of curiosity. And it's amazing. And, I've learned a lot from that because one, I've always been too afraid to reach out. Just growing up, I'd been like, why would they want to spend time with me? And Sriram would just be like, you never know. You just have to like shoot your shot and just like put yourself out there. And it's great advice. Like, now we talk about this a lot to like people who are like much younger than us. You just have to like reach out.
By the way, I think one interesting concept between Aarthi and me is I'm often much more surface level, and sometimes I inject a little bit of showmanship, if I do say so myself. But Aarthi is the one who goes super deep. So you won't believe the number of conversations we would have where I would be like, well, I think X, and Aarthi would have, spent like hours or days, and she'd have looked at all the discords, and there is no graph which she has not fallen in love with, and she would know everything. And so much of her conversation would be like, I think it looks good, and she'd be like, I don't know, well, this thing is happening this way, that thing is happening that way, that metric is going this way. I don't know. I'm like, well, I just liked it, right? Like, so we have a bunch of those.
Sriram's very right-brained as a person. I'm very left-brained. So we complement each other. But I'm very metrics oriented. And Sriram would just literally hand wave at me and be like, numbers, as if he's swatting a fly. And I just like it. I just like digging into the details of things and just gives me
yeah. I'd be like, well, I don't know, I just liked it, but yeah, I don't know, a lot more to unpack there, Danny.
Well, it sounds like you guys complement each other well, and one of the tactics you use, Shriram, is to when you meet new people or you interview people, you often have the perspective of teach me how to do your job, and I think that's such a fascinating way to orient any conversation because people love talking about what they do and how they do it, and they often don't get a chance to do so. So when you meet 10 new people over the course of a week, you're able to quickly connect with them because of that. So tell me, like, where does that come from? Teach me how to do your job and the benefits of interviewing people in that way.
It's a good question. I think, so I stole it. And the person I stole it from is Michael Lewis of, Flash Boys, Moneyball, best-selling author. And there was an article he wrote, I believe it was in Vanity Fair about 5-6 years ago, where he was interviewing President Obama. And he was trying to figure out what is the question I can ask, Obama that he has not been asked before. And also ask him a question where, sometimes when you're talking to somebody, they'll just fall into the lane of like, oh, I know how to answer this. I've answered this like a million times before, right? It's not good or bad. It's just they've answered it. And you want to sometimes get them off those grooves, those rails, not to make them uncomfortable, but just to be like, get them to think and react. And what Lewis did was he asked him, if I had your job for a day, teach me to do your job. Right, and if I remember the piece, Obama was kind of taken aback, and he kind of came with a surface level answer, and then later he comes back and says, well, I'm going to give you a real answer, right? And he talks about, for example, look, first of all, if a problem's coming to you, it means it's hard, because if it wasn't hard, somebody else would have tackled it already, right? That's why, and that's the super fun, and I that really left a card with me. And so many years later, so when we are talking to a guest, right, there are multiple things going on, right? First of all, like, I'm just, Aarthi and I, we're just curious, right? We want to know, so we're very lucky to have access to some very interesting people. We are like, okay, how do we kind of squeeze the orange, right? Get interesting stuff out of them, right? Second is, our whole thing is, how did this person make it? And what is kind of a way to get that story out of them, right? Because if you ask me like, what is the story of your life, you get like one version of it. But I think like but I think sometimes when you ask them, teach me to do your job, you get a sense of their mastery. You get a sense of like, oh wow, I see why this person is at the very top of their field. Like for example, last year, when we on Clubhouse, we had Tony Hawk, and one of the things I remember from Tony Hawk saying, he said, was like, I'm thinking of doing new tricks all the time. Like even right now, my brain is trying to think of new tricks, and you were like, okay, wow, this is the reason why this guy is where he is, right? And I love that sense where you go, okay, I know how to get there, but I also see why this person is where they are. And it's both inspiring, but also you're like, wow. And the third part of it is, a podcast or a conversation, especially somebody you don't know, is kind of a weird medium, right? You're out
Mhm.
there and, you want to kind of put on your best self, but you don't totally maybe trust the other person. And I'm trying to figure out, okay, how do I get this person into something they feel comfortable with, right? They want to talk about. And for example, let's say you're an actor, right? Like you don't want to get asked for the nth time, like why are you excited about the role? That might be interesting, but you want to ask them like something they feel passionate about. Trust me, and if you're a great actor, you're probably passionate about the process of acting, or hopefully you are. So, and it's a great way to get people into a comfort zone where they're like, okay, this is something I love talking about, and I think about this all the day, especially if you're top of the industry. And I think it doesn't always work, but when it works, it's magical. Yeah.
Any additional tips or things you've picked up on, Aarthi, for interviewing tactics or skills? It could just be a way you guys connect with each other or things you've learned from Sriram.
I think, yeah, I mean, I think everything what Shriram said about like just getting them comfortable, all of that. I think for me, I like to see where the conversation goes, and I'm just generally curious about what they do, or just there's always this element of like I would like ask that couple of extra questions to like dig in, because they would just say something offhand and they would just assume like people know, uh, and I'd be like, wait, why do you care about that? I think like for example, I think we had Palmer Lucky, a couple weeks ago. And this guy's like created Oculus and has created Anduril, and they're like completely different. And so we asked him, I think Shriram asked him, why did you pick up like this other company, the second company that has nothing to do with the first, the different domain altogether? And Palmer was like, yeah, like defense is really important. And yeah, I saw that there's not really big investments, and the way the government initiatives are structured is just not working. So I really wanted to go fix that. And he gives his answer and he says, and I thought about like prison reform and obesity, but then I picked this, and he just moved on. And I was like, wait a second, what? Like, why did you pick those? Though again, those seem like prison reform is very, very different from obesity as a problem. And he was like, yeah, and he started like getting into that. So I don't do it so much for the views. I kind of do it as like, I just want to know, like, and it would have been really fun for him to pick obesity as a problem. I know very little about prison reform, but I'm guessing it's like very impactful work. So I also wanted to know why he didn't do it and ended up picking this instead. And it's worked out really well. It's timely with like all the happenings in the world right now with Andy Rill. But it's
Yeah.
just coming from a place of curiosity.
Yeah. I think one thing that Aarti and I tried to do also is when we started doing this more seriously, we were like, okay, let's go learn from all the greats, right? And
Mhm.
by no means are we, anywhere near some of these people, but I try to kind of listen like what makes some of the best be the best. So, and I try to steal from them. So, for example, right, I think Lex Friedman, one of the things I think which makes him so special is number one, he doesn't interrupt, he just listens. And number two is he does a great job of bringing out the humanity in people who are often incredibly scientific, academic, and he'll ask them what's the meaning of life or love, and it just takes him in a different direction. He does it with such earnestness and sincerity, and that's what makes Lex who he is. I look at somebody like Rogan, and I think the ability to just have a free flowing conversation, and with no preconceptions, and just engage, be in the moment, and just see where this goes over like a few hours. I think that's what among other things makes Rogan very special. But if you look outside of sort of the internet podcast world, Howard Stern I think has been very interesting. Where if you look at Stern, I think one of the things that makes two things I think I always try to like pick up from him. One is the level of research he does. Like there's this great, if folks want to learn the art of interviewing, go listen to two things. One, his interview with Conan, where Conan talks about the late night wars. I think it might be one of the best episodes Howard ever did. But also there's an episode where he interviews Jon Stewart. And Howard has done enough research, or one of his team does, where they know the first ever joke Jon Stewart ever said in a public sort of a stand-up, and you can see John should just be like, oh my god, right? And so the level of research, because what that does is when Howard Stern does an interview, he's so prepared, he knows where to take the conversation. But the thing is with Howard is sometimes when people get very researched, the interviews can feel mechanical, that you're going through the checklist. And I feel that sometimes myself, I'm like, oh, I know what this person's going to say, I'm just going through the motions. But I think Howard does an interesting job of, he's done the research, but then, and I think sometimes because he's been in therapy, he's doing something, let's get something new out of the person. But I think he's just super interesting. On the exact other side of the spectrum, I think is the late, great Larry King. Now, Larry King, if you read about him, he kind of prided himself on not knowing anything about his guests, right? He would go into the studio and be like, who are you? Like, why do I care about you? Well, what is this?
Why are you famous? How did you get so rich?
Yeah. What is this Microsoft company that you're running, right? And because his idea was that the audience also doesn't know, and they want to learn with him. So why does a guy or the street going to care about you? And I think that is super interesting. Lots of other people, like for example, Oprah, I think is very interesting for getting somebody to be vulnerable and
just
open.
Incredibly high EQ, just through the roof, right? Like she really understands in that moment what they're feeling. And now that we've done a bunch of these interviews, we realize how hard that is to just really emote with the audience and emote with the other person across. That's just super skills there.
Yeah, a podcast conversation is such an interesting thing, right? You are creating a bubble, right? And of its energy, intimacy, dynamic. It's a weird bubble because it's going to be seen by thousands or maybe millions of people later, right? But you need to get it to an interesting, intimate spot where the other person feels they can open up, and you maybe open up back to them, and it is a shared thing. And the getting that bubble right is, I think that's kind of like some of the secrets. So that's what the greats are really good at. Like one last person, I think this is an esoteric one, but I go back to this a lot. John le Carre, who recently passed away, the late great John le Carre, amazing espionage thriller. Aarti's a huge fan. I'm a huge fan. We have all his books. He hated doing interviews, absolutely hated them, right? But but in the 90s or 80s, he was kind of contractually bound in France to do an interview on a late night talk show. Think their version of Fallon or Leno or one of those, by a guy named, I'm going to butcher it, Bernard Pivot. And by the story is actually on my site because I love it so much. And Le Carre's like, oh my God, this is going to be terrible. My French is not good. I'm English. And he goes in there and he says within the first 10, 15 seconds, he's like, oh, I get it. I get why this guy is so good, why he's famous. Because it's not because he's good looking or funny. It's because he gives the guest a feeling of, this is going to be okay. You're going to, this is going to be a positive.
It's going to be safe, building that level of a safety net around, I think is really important because you want people to feel like, oh, that was good. Like you want the feeling when they finish up and hang up and disconnect this call, they want to feel like, that was really good. I'm really glad I did that. And that's on you as a host to make them feel that way. And so we kind of take it seriously. I think one of the compliments we got was we interviewed the most famous person in India. His name is A.R. Rahman. He's a big music director, won a couple of Oscars. But more importantly, he's from the same town as we are in India.
Wow.
And this guy is like a legend, right? It's like, one of those like greatest people you'll ever meet. We've been fans just listening to his music growing up. So we happened to have this chance to interview him in person. And so we took the assignment very seriously. We watched every interview of him that there ever was. Like, I'm not even kidding, like 100+ hours of just watching content and coming up with questions and really preparing, because this is high stakes. Like my mom would watch this and she would have an opinion of it, and she did. And so we prepared a lot and sat down, and we got this like whole crew and, got in here and did this thing. We finished the whole thing and like uploaded it. And A.R. Rahman, when he was like heading out, he was talking to somebody else on his team. And he was telling them, I can't believe the amount of preparation that these two did going into this. And we were like, yes, thank you. Thanks for saying that.
Oh my God, that was such... But by the way, I would say that's like meeting a childhood idol for us. We were so stressed out. We were under so much pressure. I mean, people ask us about the Elon interview a lot, but that A.R. Rahman interview, because every parent, relative, childhood friend where like, oh my gosh. And so there was some serious, and I mean, he had somebody we known, looked up to from the 90s, right? So it was a
Wow.
huge deal. And, and I remember there was a story which Aarthi and I brought up, which he had mentioned like 10 years ago. And I could almost see it in his eyes being like,
He just like lit up. He was
Yeah.
like, "Whoa, how did you?" And I
He-
was like, "We know everything about you."
we have stalked you, right? He went like, he could just see him smile, be like, okay, all right, I see you folks, right? This is not going to be one of these surface level things, right? Because we had dug up like a very esoteric thing. And by the way, just like you did when you brought her up her
The
bio.
YC thing, which blew me away. Like most people don't usually mention
Oh
that.
gosh, yeah, but
Thank you.
no, yeah, well, yeah. So lots somewhere in there, we try and like learn from all these folks. But
So, Sriram, why WWE?
You see the belt there?
It's not just a belt. I've heard you mention before why it's such an important
It's. I'm not
part
even
of your.
kidding. The house is like full of this stuff. There's like John Cena's hat here. We've been to I think what 5, 6 WrestleManias now.
Not enough. Yeah. I think there are a few answers to this. One is I grew up watching it, and like a lot of people, I grew up in the '90s. Watching Bret Hart and Hogan and Triple H and Shawn Michaels and all the greats, and it was kind of a big part of my childhood. They kind of exposed me to American pop culture in a way. Growing up in India, a lot of Indians, I think my age, are kind of fans of WWE. WWE is actually really big in India. But one thing I think I did was I just kept watching it. I think through my 20s, 30s, and actually one of the things I was very lucky about for the last 4 or 5 years is I actually got to meet and know some of the people there. We actually had Triple H and Stephanie McMahon on our show last year. Actually, might get them back later, and so that's been super special. So that's one part of it. I think the other part of it, which might be more interesting for the audience here, is I think there's a lot to learn from WWE. Now, if you're not a fan and if you're not a deep fan, you might kind of be like, well, I don't get it, right? Like, okay, there are a bunch of people. It's fake fighting is kind of one of the things you hear. And I'm like, okay, you're really missing out, right? Like, if you call it fake, it's like saying, well, Luke Skywalker is not actually real, right? Like, well, that's not the point, right? What I think WWE is really good at is really sharply defined characters, the good guys versus the bad guys, storytelling, especially in sort of this heightened emotional states, right? Like when it's good, and when it's good, it's really good. They can get the highest of highs emotionally and the lowest of lows, right? Like, so it's not as simple as the good guy always wins over the bad guy. And the interesting thing I think about is how do you apply those lessons to just regular life? And once you kind of watch enough WWE, you can sort of see things in media and culture, and you're like, oh, this person, sometimes in politics, sometimes in media, they're being a babyface, a good guy, right? Or they're being a heel, a bad guy, right? And what they're trying to crystallize their character, and they're trying to package themselves, right? Or they call what WWE say, they're cutting a promo, which means they're saying, I'm a good guy, I'm a bad guy. You should watch me fight it out this weekend, buy the tickets, or maybe in a debate on TV, right? So, and you get to see these things, and you also see the importance of, a big entrance, right? Or, or how to get a crowd worked up. And I think one thing Zabit really good at is reading an audience and reacting to it live. It's more like stand-up comedy than theater, because you have to react very well. So I think I take a lot of lessons from it. I'm a fan, and
I also want to say, whoever does those montage sequences, oh my God, they're so good. Like I'll watch like, a Monday Night Raw episode just to see how they edit together. And now that we're doing content and we put together like cold opens and intros and stuff, it is so hard. It is so hard to weave that story together and keep it suspenseful, but also just like really tightly edited and tell that underdog story. And they do it incredibly well. So just mad editing skills.
oh my gosh, yeah. I'll give it a couple of examples, which we can link to. Is like, Shawn Michaels versus Undertaker, WrestleMania, I think 26, streak versus career, and him retiring after that. The video pack. I mean, first of all, maybe the greatest matches of all time. People should watch that. But the video packages of telling the story, even if you have know nothing about it, some of the best cinematic work. And by the way, our editors, we send it to them all. They're like, hey, can you make it look like this? And they're like, we don't have the resources. But
no, they're like, we have to work with both of you.
yeah,
Like,
and but I think so much to learn from there, I think. And yeah, huge fan.
Well, it's funny because Rick Rubin, who I would love to see on your guys' podcast, was recently on Joe Rogan, and he mentioned how WWE is actually realer than real life. And I thought that was such a fascinating concept. As somebody who doesn't watch but once did when I was younger, I was curious why you think he made that comment.
Oh wow. I should take this question.
Yes.
I actually, I mean, I need to go watch. I heard about that podcast. I need to go watch it.
Amazing episode.
I think I think WWE does a few things. So WWE, well, pro wrestling has a phrase called kayfabe, right? Kayfabe, it means the alternate reality in which pro wrestling exists in, right? It's not totally real. It's not totally fake. Reality television is kind of similar, right? Like it's not when you watch a Bravo show, it's not unscripted, right? But there is some element of truth in there. And the pro wrestling exists in a state of kayfabe. And one of the things when you look at WWE is you realize, wait, it's not just WWE, which is kayfabe. A lot of things that we react to are also similarly constructed, right? Like, by people who sometimes have agendas, good or bad, but they are constructed realities, right? And once you kind of think of it that way, you're like, okay, well, who's actually constructing the reality? Who are the good guys and bad guys? And, that's kind of just an interesting lens to look on in the world. I think politics is actually a very easy example, but you also see it in sports. Like, for example, Floyd Mayweather, he was actually very close to a lot of folks at WWE, but he basically constructed a character for himself, like Money Mayweather, right? The heel, the bad guy. He's actually, and he kind of constructed this thing, and or Conor McGregor. So they kind of constructed these characters which makes people hate them, which then makes people want to pay money to somebody beat them up, and then they kind of like build their careers around that. But I think the core idea I think behind this is like once you see how WWE constructs an alternate reality, how they construct potential good guys, bad guys, how they tell a story leading to a conflict, right? I mean, then you say, well, you look at other situations and you're like, well, who's constructing this reality, right? Who's telling this story? Who's trying to make themselves out as the good guys? And who are they trying to make out as the bad guys? And so it gives you a lens at which to look at a lot of other things that we encounter in, sort of politics or the corporate world in.
Sriram also has this habit of randomly inserting WWE lines when nobody's asking for it. And so that it's more real than real life because like a random email or like a WhatsApp thread, he'd be like, in WWE, there's a term for this. And I'm like, no one's asking. Like, just move on.
Oh, yeah. For example, okay, can I just hit you up with a few phrases, right? I love.
Please.
Number one, put someone over, right? Put someone over. By the way, when he looks at the YouTube retention charts for this interview, it's going to like dip.
This
right?
is where it dips.
Yeah. Okay, but let's do this. Okay. So put someone over. Put someone over means like you have to acknowledge how good they are, right? Or you let them win. Like for example, right? A lot of times in WWE, like if somebody be like, "I'm going to beat you up on Sunday," and the other person goes like, all right, nobody wants to care, right? You have to react, right? You have to be angry. You have to be like, whoa, all right, well, you might, but I'm going to do blah, 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 right? So you have to react. And so when sometimes in the podcast conversation, when the other person tells a story and they're trying to be funny, you better laugh, right? Like, you better react too. Or if they're trying to be emotional, you need to sort of, or, sometimes a lot of people are not good about saying how accomplished they are. A lot of people are just trained to be humble or they're just naturally humble. You have to talk about what their accomplishments are, right? So in WWE, for example, a lot of the best people, they will not say like, well, you are not as good as me. They'll be like, look, I know what you've done. You've won the title 5 times, but you have never run into someone like me before, right? So when you have somebody as a guest, you can be like, well, you built this amazing company and you've done all of these things. So you have to hype them up because they can't do it them. So that's one. Then I think often I think about the what an audience likes, for example. So, for example, heels and faces. So, a heel's a bad guy typically, and a face is a good guy typically. But what's more interesting is what the transition between one to the other is. So, there's a phrase called turn. A turn is when a bad guy becomes a good guy, or a good guy becomes a bad guy. For example, Anakin Skywalker turns, becomes Darth Vader, bad guy, turns, becomes good guy again, right? So, and one interesting thing about WWE is that the most interesting thing often is when a bad guy is cheered on and the audience wants them to be good, right? And that's kind of, those moments where the WWE kind of get Aarti's like, why are you even going on about this?
For the remaining 2 people who are still listening.
No, I personally love it, and I see a connection between podcasting and pro wrestling that I previously never experienced. But
Danny, you're so gracious and kind. Like you should just cut him off. It's okay.
No, I love it. That's what you guys could do later. But Aarti, what in your life are you as excited about as Sriram is WWE?
Nothing can like possibly top this. um, okay, what is there are a bunch of projects that I love doing. One, obviously we talked about this, like founders, helping founders. I'm deeply passionate about it. It's something that I do. Giving back is one reason, but also I just find I get great energy from it. I think I feel like people build good products when they have cross pollination of ideas from different fields and different industries, and the more you're exposed to it. And this is something we've talked about too, where I think you grow up, you kind of pick a career path, and you kind of get siloed into that, and you stop looking at other industries or other fields. And I think that's really bad. And I think the best people try and learn from everyone and everywhere. And the more you put yourself in that situation where it's like, yesterday I talked to an e-commerce company who was trying to do like, drop shipping and last mile logistics and trying to like figure that out. But right before that was like a creator monetization company that was building like a SaaS model around it. And they're totally different, but there are things that you can learn from each other. And so I'm really passionate about that area of like founders and helping companies win and be successful. I really like that. Overall, I really like the space of math and data, and it's like a hard thing to go point to and say, this is what I like. But I generally get a lot of energy from just looking at like metrics, data science, like all of that stuff. Sriram's nodding. I don't think it's a good thing.
Highly, you can verify that comment. By the way, I just like that, I just went on for 10 minutes about pro wrestling, and then she was like, I'm the VC, and she's like, I like helping founders. I'm like, okay, well, all right.
I love it.
Man.
Well, it's beautiful because it's kind of like you talked about this before, but just there's math involved, and then there's also like connecting with people involved. And it's not like, Aarthi, you don't like connecting with people. It certainly seems like you do based on the podcast that I've listened to, but it seems like one's strong suit and one has a strong suit, and together you guys can create this almost like superhero team.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, and to be honest, I always struggle when people ask, like, what do you like have fun doing outside of like your core stuff? Is the real reason, like, answer is like we have two kids and they're really small and they take up a lot of our time, and we love it. It's great, but there are also times when you're like exhausted. You just like want to just lie down and not wake up for a while.
I don't know how many of Danny's listeners are parents, but the parents are going, yep, I know what that's
I know.
like.
I feel like people don't really, it's not a thing to talk about, but parenting is hard, you guys. Like, it's just, it takes a lot of time and energy. And like last night, we had a particularly rough bedtime with one of the kids. And, today we woke up being like, okay, the sun shines again, like another day. And we just like at it. So
the parents here will understand. I think Aarthi and I just have very different perspectives because she's been a multi-time founder. I've never founded a company. So she has like a very different founder lens on things. So, for example, often, sometimes, the people I work with, just founders I talk to, they'll talk to her because we just get very different viewpoints on things. I work in different companies than her, and so that really helps. I think just being able to bring different lenses, viewpoints, life experiences to something.
That makes sense. You guys mentioned the kids before, and it's because your relationship is now a public one. How much of your public personas is different from your private lives?
Oh my goodness. That's a good question.
I mean, I think we asked Pomp and Paulina this when they were on our show. And, they went through this incident and they didn't really, like, they kind of mentioned their kid's name and put some photos up, but then people got like really familiar. We haven't quite figured out the nuance there. Like for us, the big thing is, the reason why, like we are fairly public with like our kids' names and ages and what they do and all of that, like our IG and all of that. But also it's because it's our way of connecting to our families that don't live here, and so they kind of see it and they like comment on it, and our friends are in India and like all of that. So for us, it makes sense to like feel connected. And so far it's been okay. But I do think as they're growing, it's something that we are thinking about more on like how much is okay to put out there from like a kid's side of things. Personas as such, I don't know if you're very different in private versus public.
Yeah, are we a heel or a face? uh, 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 it- it-
No, I think, yeah, I think if anything, when the camera is on, I think you kind of see it amplified a little bit.
Mhm.
Most like at home, obviously we're not like talking to each other like this, and emoting and expressing.
yeah.
And there's like a rhythm of everyday life that we just go through. But I think we're pretty much the same, or at least I'd like to think so, except that there are like spikes
Yeah,
in
I think
specific personality
I think like
tropes.
the public version is like a distilled version. I would say it is impossible to be anyone other than yourself if you're talking for so long on video, right?
Mm.
Which is one of the reasons I think if you look at Rogan's podcast, the reason they're good is you can be on message for an hour, for 2 hours, but if you're doing like like Balaji did like
For
7 hours,
Lex with like 8 hours.
8 hours. By the way, 8 hours on Lex. It's like endurance contest. And did they take a bathroom break? Like what happened? Like I just want to know. I have so many questions. But
And Balaji is truly like that, like in person, short conversation, WhatsApp,
yeah,
or like, on the show. That's just who he is.
yeah.
And for 8 hours, 10 hours, 12 hours, he can go.
Yeah.
And that is just who he is. He
You
can't
can't
fake
hide,
it.
right? Like you
Yeah.
absolutely can't hide. Like, and so while we are more heightened and we are aware that you have some listeners and hopefully we keep them interested, but you can't hide over a long period of time, and especially if we have, I don't know, hundreds, if not more, hours of content on the internet. It is you, some version of you, and a lot of people when they've gotten to know us after listening to us, you folks are kind of similar because you can't hide, right? And after your pretenses or you're like, well, I need to project this image, will break down over time. When you're an hour in, two
Mm.
hours in, it'll just be you.
Yeah, that makes sense. You guys mentioned before about how you spoke to the most famous person in India, basically, and you did that in a live setting. And most of your podcasts happen online, like we're doing right now. Are the differences you've noticed from the in-person interviews versus doing them virtually?
Oh man, great question. We love in-person interviews. We didn't think we would, but there is this element of just in-person chemistry that is it's so intimate, and it feels like you are actually sitting down and sharing a meal or drinking coffee together. Like it feels so connected, like as if you're just hanging out with them, which we first started doing. It was all just audio, so there wasn't even video when we started out, and then it became video, and then we started like layering in some in-person interviews. Like A.R. Rahman was in person,
Andrew
Andrew
Yang.
Yang was in person, and Andrew Yang literally showed up at our doorstep and came to our like the whole episode is shot in our dining room. And literally, I think we edited this part out, but the Amazon guy rings the bell and just wouldn't go away. So I had to like go out and get the package and bring it in and just like pause the whole thing for a bit. But there is this level of intimacy when it's like happening in your house, in your room. We would love to do more in person stuff, but I also think the logistics of it is really
Yeah.
hard to figure out. Like
Yeah.
here, it's like a Zoom call. You can kind of record, you can do the post processing, editing, all of that, and clean up. But in person is like timing, scheduling stuff, them showing up, the cameras and the setup on all sides, and just figuring all of that out.
Yeah.
I think is like it's a bigger investment of like everything, time,
Yeah.
resources, all of it.
That's a trade-off, right? Like it's much better conversation in person, but the logistics, the guests you want to get, them being the same city, it's going to make it so much harder to book people. So maybe someday, I love that Rogan, for example, forces people to be in person. I think it's going to be really hard to do like a multi-hour. We did 3 hours with Balaji, and we are pretty exhausted. I think staring into a screen for 3 hours is like a lot harder than doing in person. But it's just so much easier on the logistics side. Maybe someday we would love to have more in-person guests, right? But it's just hard logistically.
There's a lot of people. You guys are in the Bay Area, right? So it's like that all. There's a bunch of people in the Bay Area.
I don't know.
Danny's like, you live in San Francisco. You don't live in like random
You don't live in the middle of
place.
nowhere.
Yeah.
You would think so, but I think, well, a lot of people.
The time we like to do, if it's
Gotcha.
like a longish interview, is at like 10 p.m. at night. That's when the kids are asleep, and we like grab some dinner, and then like we get online and we can just do this stuff. but nobody wants to like come home at like 10 p.m. and be like, let's do this. Like,
Maybe
let's
we should just invite them over, grab a drink, and
just get into it.
yeah, progressively get drunk over the
Yeah, the
conversation
conversation just deteriorates.
or it gets better. You never know.
Well, well, it's funny because it started as a clubhouse show. It started being so easy for you guys to do that way, and then you've now transitioned to a podcast. And it's funny because it's like the transition from a clubhouse show to a podcast really has never been done before. So like what people are going to now in the next 10 years, I believe, start Twitter Spaces shows and platforms like that and transition into different mediums. So what advice would you have for people who are making that jump?
I think for us, a few things. I think live audio is incredibly low lift. Like we would have never done this if it hadn't been for Clubhouse as a platform because it's just so easy. Like, we didn't have to think about how we looked, or any of that. We
I
could
look
just
fantastic.
like we literally went to
Both of you.
different rooms in our houses. Like he went to the bedroom and I was in the living room, and we would just get on the Clubhouse call at the same time and just talk. And it was so easy. If you told us, hey, you have to have like this setup, and so I think there is something about lowering the barrier to entry, which I think Clubhouse was really successful for us to like be able to do it. But I think over time, as we started getting guests and everything, too, we really like the video aspect now that we've done it because it lets us do this whole thing, figure out like facial expressions, how people like, emote. I think that's key. But also it lets us like share snippets on different platforms. So we can do like YouTube shorts and reels and, just clips of like YouTube stuff and put it on TikTok and everything else. But that, you couldn't do it with just audio. Like you could, but it's like much higher kind of barrier to entry to get there.
How are you guys so good at that stuff? The clips, shorts, the reels, like those are some of the best produced video pieces of content I've ever seen. What is going on there?
Yeah, I mean, thank you. Wow. Thank you for noticing. I feel like only other creators will know what we are doing and what the effort that goes into this. But this is like, I kind of took this as a project, like since like June or so. I was like, I really want us to like think about this as a kind of more time and effort. And also, I'm very metrics driven. I kind of look at it as like, what does it take to go grow subs and grow viewers? And it's been really fun as just like a metrics experiment. Like, we thought about like how many subs would we get by what time frame, and we have these like internal bets, and we've kind of been beating that every month.
Yeah.
That's been nice. Views, we've been like doubling pretty much once every 9 days or so, and that's kind of been fun. Like at some point it'll break down, but it's been really fun to go see that kind of like a fairly exponential growth too.
If the folks listening to this, if you want to make Aarthi really happy, go find our channel, like and subscribe, leave a comment, right? Get the metrics up, and you will make her a bit happy.
Man.
I think, but Aarthi takes all the credit for just making all of this work, and trust me, she looks at the graphs every day.
Link below.
I think one thing we really want to do is I think at the heart of it is you just need to have great conversations and content. And it sounds like a cliche, but trust me, I kind of, it's one of these things like, I joke with Aarthi, right? It's like, how do you get fit or six-pack abs? Well, it's diet and exercise, right? Like, it's like the basics, and that's what really matters. Now we have a code where we say diet and exercise, which means like we just need to do the basics. And and the reason sometimes people ask me, what is the camera you folks use? What is the editing software you folks use? Like that stuff, honestly, is like the icing on the cake. But the diet and exercise part is, are you having a fun conversation? Is your content interesting? And the more we've had fun, the more we are focused on why is this interesting to people, it's done so much better than when we have tried to do some fancy gear or try to do some fancy algorithm hack or whatever. Those things are, not that they haven't, always useful, but the most of it is good people, good conversation. That's the meat and potatoes of it. And so for folks who want to do this, it honestly, your equipment doesn't matter. If you look at like all the great YouTubers, right? Like MKBHD for years on like a terrible camera, Casey Neistat, like all these folks, it's not like get fancy gear. You just like, are you interesting? Are the people you have on interesting? Are you producing something that makes someone want to click, download, listen, join whatever the thing is, and then be like, I'm going to continue listening to this. So if you can do that, right, I think that's the core of it. All the other stuff, right, the algorithm hacks, the big font, the lenses, the cameras, the lights, they are all, they're a small delta on top.
Yeah, totally agree. I think also when I join the show, like when we go live and we are interviewing somebody, I look at how like Sriram always like introduces or starts, right? And I like take a step back and like I don't think Sriram knows this, but he like I'll watch him and he like introduce the guest and get into it, and in my mind I'm like, this is going to be really good. Like I want to like watch what this interview is like, and he's very charismatic, just comes into it, high energy, and just like gets into it, and it's such a treat to like just watch this, and he's been. And Sriram said, I really like talking, and that could have been a career path like very early on. And he kind of said that as a throwaway comment, but he's been doing this since as a kid. Like, I've been to his house in Chennai, and his mom had like she has shown me these like stacks of certificates he's won in like elocution contests and debate contests and all of that. So he's been doing this for most of his life, and so he's like clearly good at this. And so totally right. Like, he comes in and just like delivers, just like is high energy and,
my God,
and does it. And so everything else, like my job just becomes easy to like cut this up and edit it and make it really tight and put a good thumbnail on it. That's it. That's like packaging. I can do that.
Well, thank you. Well, by the way, that, ladies and gentlemen, in WWE terms, is putting someone over. Right there.
Oh my goodness.
That was amazing. I'll just say though, one of the secrets that we have is, since there are two of us, we can sort of balance off energies. Like, not both of us want to do it every single year, right? And and one thing Aarthi really does is like, trust me, the one time she's like, gosh, I really don't want to talk to this guest, right? Like, I would get a text like 10 minutes in being like, she'd be like, hey, okay, let's just power through this. Like, we need to make this work. And I'd be like, okay, I'm in it. I'm powering through. So that's actually a secret thing, because since we have two of us, one of us can bring the energy, because it's impossible to be in the zone as one person all the time, right? And I'm sure you feel this too, which is like, not every guest is going to be engaging or interesting, and your energies are like,
you also, I think in the first few minutes you know how it's going to go. Like, you also know how much effort you need to put in versus like whether they came to play. And we often say this, right? It's like, oh, they came to play, this is good, right? Like, and it's just easier. But when they don't, you're like, oh no, I'm going to feel every minute of the next hour, and this is going to be a lot of work.
Oh yeah, a great example. Palmer Luckey came to play. He was like, ask me anything, I'll just go anywhere, right? Or
Brian Armstrong.
Brian, right?
At some point, he was like, you should ask me what if I thought taking Coinbase public was a mistake, and I'm like, what?
Yeah.
Like, I was afraid to ask him questions like that, and he was like, yeah, that's a great question, you should just ask. And I'm like, wow.
Yeah. And
great.
sometimes some people don't come to play, right? And then it's a little bit of a struggle. You're like, okay, all right, I have an hour here, what do I do to get something out of them, make them comfortable, but they really want to stay on those lanes, or they don't want to kind of deviate, and that's a little bit more of a struggle. And that's when having two of us helps, because sometimes I'll run out of ideas. I'll be like, well, why do I take this conversation next? And Aarthi can take in a very different direction. And I'm like, okay, I'm happy she's there asking that thing, because it gives me some time to process it. And it's a very different tact. And so that's actually what really helps when you have two people.
One thing I've also found is that sometimes what you think about someone coming to play or not is actually just your own mind playing tricks on you. Meaning, like, someone will give very short answers, and then you'll go back and you'll look at their previous interview and be like, wow, that short answer was 10 seconds in that previous interview, but for me it was 30 seconds. And you're like, wait, like, that person was really into it, they just expressed it differently.
Right. Yeah. And I think coming to play means different things for different people, right? And for from their side, they're trying to do their best. It just may not match what you want to do. And also energy levels can just be off, and they are just like much more buttoned up and structured. Whereas you like look at it as like, wow, they're so like monotone, and like, it just doesn't feel like high energy. But that it's just like a difference in what your expectation is and what they think they're bringing to the table. But if you can bridge that, I think that's kind of where the magic is. And Sriram does that often. Like, I see him like kind of like, get really excited, and he's not like putting on a show. That's just how he is. And I've seen him like post show too. Like we hit leave and we'll like, go sit in front of our TV and watch Netflix for a few minutes. And he'd just be passed out. He'd be so exhausted. And I'm like, what happened to that person? And he's like, yeah, that person was on screen. I no longer exist. I just need to like lie down.
Oh my gosh. That is true. But I think, I think having two people like Aarthi putting a lot of the prep, being really focused, going super detailed, and me being weird and goofy, I think we can play off each other. That really helps.
Okay, so take me through the aftermath of what happens when 800,000 people are listening to you at the same time.
Wow. Great question. So you're talking about the Elon Musk day, obviously. So here's the story of the day. So one is, this is going to sound super name droppy, but we just kind of gotten friendly with Elon over the last few years through a variety of means. And I had texted him saying, hey, you should come on our show. And we were just working out some schedule. And that Sunday, I just texted him and said, hey, what about tonight? I wasn't really expecting him to say yes. And he said, sure, I'm in. And then I remember he just tweeted about it without even telling me, and which melted my phone. And we were like, oh my gosh, okay, we need to make it work. And we had so many worries, right? We were like, will it actually work? Will the app go down? And at one time, I remember every trending topic on Twitter was Elon's going to be on Clubhouse, and every room on Clubhouse was, what is he going to say?
Yeah, every room. I remember going into the hallway and scrolling, and every room was, what should the hosts ask Elon? Let's help them prep. And I was like,
no pressure.
Oh man!
We are the hosts. Sometimes we're like, wait, they're talking about us. And by the way, one thing which other people don't know is like, he said this, then he wouldn't respond to any of my tweets or texts for like 8 hours, right? And I was mildly stressed. I was like, well, you can't like not deliver, once you have this. But so I was very relieved when he showed up. And I think when the show started going, and the way it got to 800,000 was people were kind of live streaming elsewhere, right? There would be these Twitch streams and YouTube streams, and my phone would just keep buzzing because I'd keep getting links from people until I had to turn it off, being like, hey, this thing's actually going live. And at some point, I remember clicking onto one of the YouTube live streams in the background, and it had like several hundred thousand people watching it. And you have your slight weird out-of-body experience being like, oh, I'm saying something live, and close to 1 million people can hear it. And one of my favorite, one of many memories I have from that is at one time during the show, we start talking about, I think, Bitcoin or Dogecoin, and because that was a big thing back then. And a friend of mine, who works in crypto, would send me, he's like, oh, the price of crypto is ticking up as he talks about it, right? And when we stopped talking about it, it stopped ticking up. And you go like, wow, this is like a weird...
You're like market moving on it.
This is like a weird life experience to go through. But, but it's also like, I remember when at the end of the episode, near the end when he brought on Vlad of Robinhood on, and he asked to bring him on, and we had that entire conversation. Like I would see like these tweets just flying, right? Like it was, and I would say, and after that, we just sort of collapsed. We were like, I can't believe it. We're through this. We just sort of like sat, and it was very, it was all credit to Elon, but it was a amazing moment, and I don't think it will be replicated again. Definitely not for us.
I think it's also like the frenzy of it. Even if like Elon Musk comes on our show again, and I hope he does, but it's just never going to be like that, because just the frenetic energy of the whole thing. And then I remember even after that, like we got a lot of criticism from like professionals, like journalists and folks being like, these two are not interviewers. And I was like, what gave it away? We are not interviewers. Like we're just like goofing off and doing this stuff. Like, we have no professional experience here.
Yeah, we had, I think one thing that's very important, like we want to keep it very optimistic about the future, right? We had a set of questions. I remember like the very first thing which Aarthi was asked was, when do we get to Mars, right? That's what he
was like, he thinks about it and says 2025. And you're like, oh, okay. You realize that's going to come real soon.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we just had like a bunch of questions we had, right? We're like, okay, we're going to about Mars, we're going to ask about AI, we're going to ask about all the memes around Dogecoin, which is kind of a thing back then. We're going to ask about, I think, education. He really cared about that. And we just kind of went with it. And he came to play, to put it mildly, right? Like if you listen, and we should probably put up the episode at some time on YouTube also. He really, really came to play. And yeah, I don't think we'll ever be in the middle of an internet moment like that, but really one of
it was fun.
This
It was
was
really
fun.
good.
So the next week after that happens, like what changes do you notice personally?
Oh
And
gosh.
and do you see like on social media and like take us through the next week of that experience?
It was a crazy week. So I don't know if I talked about this before, right? So I had signed the offer to join my firm, Andreessen Horowitz, but the day after the Elon interview was going to be my first day, right? And it just happened because I texted in that afternoon. It wound up happening. So I had like a very intense week, right? So I start off on my day job. I'm sort of this, because my first day, we hadn't actually announced anything in public. And actually, the news wound up leaking. And my favorite story was somebody was like, A16Z hires this person who interviewed Elon, as if, Mark and Ben were like, hey, this guy, kid, right? Like, he's interviewing Elon, like, let's bring him in, right? So the news wound up leaking somehow. So I had a bunch of things, right? Obviously, I'm like starting a new job, and, I'm trying to figure out what's what, and one of the things I think when you start in venture is you get a lot of people who want to come meet you, right? They're like, hey, they want to come pitch you, they want to talk to you, and you're trying to deal with that. And obviously, I'm just joining a new organization, but also we now, have, this show which is really kind of like taken off, and we have a lot of interesting people reaching out to us who want to come on our show. And
Yeah, I think that was a very demonstrable delta, right? Like we went like a couple months from like just trying to figure out how do we get the next episode in place, like who would be our guest, how do we get somebody who's like semi-legitimate to come on board. And at that time we were still doing it from like advice kind of sessions, and it like I think it deeply pivoted the show into this like guest interview mode, for better or for worse. Like that just became the nature of it, because right after that we started, like, crazily enough, we started getting inbound, like people actually like reaching out to us being like, I want to be on your show. And we're like, are you sure? Like, we are like nobody, we don't have experience doing this. So I think it just like changed the nature of our show, but also the amount of effort we had to put in booking guests made our lives so much easier, because we could always go out and be like, this is the show that Elon came on, and people were like, I gotcha, like I'm going to be on this show. Like that was easy.
It also, I think, helped because there's lots also different conversations people want to have, right? Like sometimes people want to ask people tough questions, speak truth to power, etc. That's not what we are trying to do. What we are trying to do is to go back to what you originally asked. Like we are trying to understand how they do their job. We are trying to get people to be more interested in technology or being a creator, and so that's what we're going. Since with Elon, we were able to do some version of that, maybe accidentally. I think it opened up a lot of other people who are interested in talking about that aspect of their life story. We had we had some Hollywood people come on. We had, for example, musicians. We had Calvin Harris and the Chainsmokers and a bunch of others, and tragic. I mean, now tragically, but we had Virgil Abloh come on, which was amazing. And so we were able to just get those optimistic conversations because they saw, oh, if Elon is able to do this, I would be able to do some version of it. But yeah, amazing life experience.
And so, Sriram, you've talked about your life and the question of your life. At least, I think you spoke to, I believe, the Silicon Valley girl, and you said that I want the question of my life to be centered around how do you get more people to participate in technology? And I thought that was such a beautiful question, particularly based on everything you do. I'm curious, Aarthi, your question as well. But while you think of that, I want to ask, how do we go about getting more people interested in participating in technology?
It's for you, not for me.
Goodness. Let's see. I think a couple of things, right? It's a good question. I don't pretend to know the answer. Like, if you just think of it as a funnel, what I think about is, okay, how do you sort of widen the aperture of the number of people who think technology is for them? And I think this is a few dimensions. One is, just in people in countries. Like one of the reasons we're doing so much stuff in, just in India is because, there are a lot of people there who I would love to just see building things. That's number one. The second dimension is how do you make things more accessible? I love that, for example, just anybody with a laptop and internet connection can actually just go and build anything, right? Like, you can create a Twitter account, you can write code on GitHub, you can learn anything, you can put up a YouTube video. I think that's democratizing, and and crypto actually kind of plays a part of that, but there's a lot more of that I would love. The third part, I think another vector is what kinds of skill sets can get into technology, right? Like you don't have to learn to code. One of these, if you look at some like AI, which is exciting, is like you can do amazing things without actually learning to code. Like GitHub Copilot makes it super easy for you. Or maybe you're creating content, right? And that's how you're getting people interested. So those are kind of the three dimensions just from first principles I think about. But I think on our own personal ways, like a lot of our job, it definitely helps my job when more people get in technology, because more people get in technology, they build amazing companies, and hopefully, me and the people I work with get to fund some of them. I think so. There's definitely some self-interest there. But honestly, the heart of it's because technology has given us so much. Without technology, we would have met each other.
Yeah.
We would have met each other. We would not have, all the opportunities we had, and a lot of the stuff we have now. We're not be able to do this. And, so this is our way of, okay, it has been so good to us. How do you make it good for other people? And, as maybe cliche as it sounds, that's at the heart of all of this.
I love it. That's a beautiful answer. Aarthi, do you have the answer to my question of what is the question that guides your life?
I don't quite have that yet, to be honest, but there are a couple of things that I think deeply about, and they're all driven from my own personal experience. I think I was the first founder in my family starting a company. And I think I look at a lot of it from the lens of what does it take for you to go do something on your own, go out on your own, build stuff on your own. And the context here is it's not generally at least from my community and where I grew up in, it's not in our culture to go do something or go out on your own. It's always like the preferred path is to join a big stable company or a bank or something, work there every day. Like my parents did this for like 30 years, 40 years. This is like they had one job. They just did that every single day until the day they retired. And that was it. That was the expectation. And if you did that, you've achieved everything you could in your life. And I kind of broke that whole mold by not just like the starting company, but studied computers when it was like not cool, left my hometown and my city to first study in a different city, but then later get a job in a different city, left the country to come here. I'd never traveled outside India. And when I did, I moved here. And so that was kind of a culture shock because, my context of America came from watching shows like Friends. And so it's kind of this like leap. And so I look at it as like, how do you empower people to go out on their own and go build stuff on their own? And whatever it is, tech, non-tech, it doesn't matter. But I think building something on your own and creating and doing like being self-sufficient, I think is like really important. And I think about that a lot. The other thing is very similar, but I think a lot of it is like India and giving back. And it's like it could be specific communities, women, I take a look at like what does it mean for more kids, women to get into computer science, like all of that. How like also like empowering, like giving them tools in their toolkit on like when you think about fundraising, how would you do it? Like there are these things that are like secret doorways that we all know now after being here in Silicon Valley that a lot of people don't. And the internet has been a great level playing field, but there are still these pockets, these questions where people are like, but how do you do that? Like, and did you just like walk up to this person? Like, what does it mean? And Sriram knows this too. I really like underdog stories, and I always see myself as an underdog. I always feel like, I've never ever won, and I think I kind of like to think it's very healthy to have that. But I love giving underdogs a fighting chance to win. And that could mean like giving them information that they don't have or connecting them with people that they aren't connected to and stuff like that. So I haven't quite figured out like the life's equation, the question there, but I'm getting there, I think. At some point when I grow up, I will.
Gosh, better answer than what I gave.
Oh my God.
Wow, okay.
What was that?
That is much better answer than the one I gave. Wow, okay. We can't beat that.
Well, I think honestly that's a beautiful place to land this pilot. And before we come to a close, I'd like to ask people about a challenge that they can leave the listener with as they go on to do their next thing in their day. So for both of you, do you have a challenge that you could instill in someone listening right now?
Yeah, I mean, I often tell people to like just figure out a way to carve out some time and go build. And building could mean anything. Building could mean like you've always wanted to like create content, write your own website, write a blog, whatever. Like put something that's your own out there into the world. And oftentimes like people will push back on like I don't have enough time, or I don't think I'm good enough, or they like the comparison is like somebody else who's like 10x better. And I'd always be like, they got 10x better because they've been doing this like a long time for every minute of the day. And so I would just like tell people to start. And for us, this whole content creation stuff kind of came in as an accident, but I'm really happy that it happened. One, I think for Sriram and I, we've always wanted to work on a project together, and this is it. Like I feel really good about like working on something together. And two, it's just a totally different thing to go learn from. It's like no matter what happens, you can't take this away from us, right? Like this is stuff that we've created and put ourselves out there with, and it's really fun to go do it and go build. And this is our version of building something.
Yeah, yeah. But when we think about like, one day we'll have hundreds and hundreds of hours that our kids can see, and we could have a great story. Okay, one challenge. I like the build part a lot. Let me say this: create one piece of content online, a tweet, a post, a YouTube video, TikTok, doesn't really matter. Just anything, and put yourself out there. And if you do it, DM it to us. I would love to see it. But just create one thing out there. I think creating content online is super powerful in so many different ways, and a lot more. Everyone should do it. So yeah, that'd be my one challenge.
I love both of them. Thank you guys so much for taking the time today. You certainly came to play.
Danny, thank you. Thanks for putting up with us. This was like
This is great.
a fairly long conversation. Thanks for just like being patient with Sriram's kayfabe and putting people over and all of that.
You got the big finish, right? You got the big. We got the big finish. That's the key to good pro wrestling. You need the big finish.
Awesome. Thank you.
Where should we send people to connect with you guys further?
Oh, wow. Okay. So we are on all the platforms. So, go to your friendly neighborhood podcast, YouTube video, whichever. But yeah, you can search for Aarthi and Sriram on YouTube, on Spotify, on Apple, but also follow us, right? She's Aarthi R, I'm Sriram K on Twitter, on Instagram. Follow us anywhere.
Yep.
Links below. Thank you guys so much. I really appreciate y'all.
This is great.
Danny, thank you so much.